One of my favorite mantras is the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. And sadly, a lot of these mental illnesses make it even harder to ask for help.
Hello and welcome. I'm very excited today to be joined by Dr. Nick Pryor from Minderful. Nick, it's very exciting to have you here. Thank you very much for coming along today. It would be great to learn a bit more about what Minderful is and your journey as to how you came up with this concept and what you do today. So perhaps if you would like to just introduce yourself first of all and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, thanks very much, Scott. It's great to be here. And so I think I'll start with the journey, but to give you a quick summary, I'm a doctor who's now specializing in mental health, working for the NHS. I also have a diagnosis of bipolar that I've lived with for over a decade now. And partly because of those two things, really, I find myself with Minderful trying to kind of create a bigger impact and to kind of help people in their kind of daily lives with looking after their minds. And it's really been that kind of journey of kind of self-discovery, which sounds a bit cliche, but of hitting a few failures, quitting a few jobs, almost dropping out of university, that have led me to kind of want to do something to help people kind of like me, but probably kind of 5-10 years younger. And that's really the kind of what drives me to find some solutions for this kind of really what is now a kind of mental health pandemic. And I think what Minderful is really trying to do is trying to get there before the illness. It's trying to be proactive, it's trying to be positive, and it's trying to get people to realize that mental fitness is just as important as physical fitness, just as what happened in the 90s when the motivation to look after your physical health got pushed up, mainly because of the change in the way in which we lived or worked. So we'd go from working on a outside, moving around to living a sedentary lifestyle. And then the combination of cheap fast food meant that people became very unhealthy. That meant that people had to be proactive. And I think we're at that point now, that tipping point where sadly people's minds are being stressed so much, whether it's to do with social media, the change in our kind of communities, the rapid change in technology, and the loss of kind of some of the structure and that we used to have has meant that we are seeing this point now where 1 in 6 people will present to their GP at some point in their lives with a mental health problem. And so we want to kind of get there, stop that from happening, and also at the same time build that resilience, which is really just a kind of bank of happiness and positivity to actually prevent mental illness.
Yeah, very interesting. So there was some work I was working on a while ago, looking at the role of emotional measurement within virtual reality to help improve many things, very from kind of mental health point of view, but also from physical health as well. And there was a startling statistic I found kind of March, April last year. In the US, the number of severe mental health problems rose by 700% in just 2 months. And I guess, when you started this journey, I would imagine that you couldn't anticipate the rapid increase in severity and kind of, I guess, some number of cases that we would see over the next 12 months. So how has that kind of impacted your work?
Yeah, I suppose kind of in a very selfish way, it's been quite fortuitous for us. Like with COVID has been that tipping point, I think, that has really put mental health into the kind of public domain to the point where we're seeing people realize this isn't just a kind of bonus or icing on the cake. This is something that is necessary and important for us. And this is shown probably most in the kind of B2B space, where we're seeing a lot of businesses, big corporates, realizing that they have to offer a well-being offering. It used to be discretionary, and HR budgets would never quite find the money when asked for it. but now we're seeing a lot of these companies kind of have to offer it. And I remember my wife works for L'Oreal, and it was during the first lockdown, and I was telling her, I bet in the next couple of weeks you're going to be sent an email through with an offering, and then the one came through the next day. So yeah, I think it is. We've been quite lucky in that regard. I think a lot of it, when you're setting up a business, whether it's tech or anything, it's about timing, and it's about why now. And I think, but an interesting the mental health space does tend to get quite crowded because it's kind of often quite a passion project. You get a lot of individuals thinking they can change the world, which is very, very positive, but equally it means there's quite a lot of kind of low quality, poorly invested kind of businesses out there. So it feels very crowded, but when you try and look at the quality of the products out there isn't really much out there.
Well, you touched on a couple of very interesting points there I want to explore. So we'll come back to the well-being in the workplace, because the workplace is not what it used to be anymore, nor is well-being. But just more on the personal side, you talk about these passion projects, and it can be quite difficult to take that leap of faith to do things that you are passionate about. And you can have people turn to you and kind of look at you strangely. It's like, wouldn't it be nice if we could all do things we are so passionate about, but we have to have a job? Tell me, how did you experience that in your life, in this move?
Yeah, it's a good question. I hadn't really thought. I think certainly, I think whenever you try and do something new, like you say to your friends or your family, I'm going to try and set up a new business. There's a lot of raised eyebrows, and I think from my point of view, it kind of I just had to prove. You have to prove a certain stickability and that it's not just a whimsical idea. And I think after kind of around 6 months, people started to change their view on what I was doing. It wasn't just a pet project. I'd also say that what really helps is actually, to add, I mean, credibility is a big word, but if you can get other people to get involved with you. So there's 2 other co-founders of Minderful, and it means that you can have a much more balanced skill set, and actually suddenly what's just an idea in someone's head becomes a much more credible kind of business model with a nice product with a kind of consumer edge to it. Because I set it out with 2 other guys, James and Ed, and I'm very much the kind of product, kind of not the product, but the actual kind of idea, like how do we create good science into this product, and a bit of a kind of, and then James is an advertising background, and he's like, well, how do we make this product delightful and actually people want to use it? And then Ed is, well, how do we actually make this product scalable and get it out the door? And I think having those, suddenly getting a few more people involved makes it much more credible. But equally, I think what I'd say in answer to that question is that it depends what you're trying to do. Like if you're trying to set up a whole new business and stuff like that requires a certain leap of faith and a big commitment. But equally, what I would say to most people is that you can reframe most of your job roles and any career path to actually be of kind of social impact. So whether that's kind of taking a lead on well-being in the workspace, whether that's taking a lead on recycling in the workspace, I think that I don't like a lot of people like to put that excuse out there. It's all right for some. You've got the space, you've got the backing, but actually, I think there isn't. If you're well and you're upbeat and you're passionate about something, you can apply it in many different ways.
Yeah, I think there's you only have to look around and see the kind of increase in the number of people who are talking about purpose-driven, about passion, about tech for purpose is an example of that, I suppose. To feel like there's this, there is a wave, there is a certain momentum that is coming right now. So yeah, I still think there's a certain reluctance, and if I look back through my career, there was a wave like this that was corporate responsibilities. When you were working within the corporations, those responsibilities seemed a little bit like lip service. We have to do them because the shareholders are asking for it, and we will make sure that we track you 4 times a year. But this move towards purpose-driven towards well-being as well. Seems bigger than that.
Yeah,
Am I wrong?
yeah. I mean, I think I'm a little bit cynical still. I think probably it's all about, well, actually what the shareholders are asking for now. Like suddenly it's got to a tipping point where the shareholders will have a problem if there isn't a wellbeing offering, and you can't be seen to be a dinosaur left behind not looking after your employees, because your brand will suffer. I think going back more to the personal, so I think there is also that capitalist view of the world where it's dog eat dog, and actually as soon as there's any soft kind of ness there, then that's got to be a loss in the end profit line. And I think probably it's trying to demonstrate that actually, one, not only is it good just full stop, but also it's probably good overall for the profit line as well.
There was some research, and if I can dig it out, maybe I'll stick a link in at the bottom underneath here, but there was some research that shows that those organizations that invest in the well-being of their staff and employees can actually outperform on the bottom line anyway. So what do you think of that? Is that?
Yeah, I think there's I've seen some kind of quite anecdotal and small bits of research showing that, and I think for me it makes perfect sense. But equally, I think the other problem from an investment point of view is that it's probably a 2 or 3 year long kind of wait for that return, and people are quite short termers, like in their outlook. So, but I think for whatever reasons, COVID, the prevalence of mental health, and we're starting the costs across even just the UK alone, in terms of absenteeism and presenteeism due to mental health, is at over 20 billion. So it's a big number, and it's only getting bigger. And I think that basically a lot of factors are aligning to mean that whether it's kind of to do with the actual performance of the workforce, or whether it's to do with the profit of the company, or whether it's to do with how the kind of overall emphasis culturally on well-being and looking after ourselves, things are lining up. And we've seen lots of companies, for example, NatWest one just only a few months ago doubled its budget for the well-being, and it so it's, and I speak to a lot of people in this space, and there's a really brilliant guy called Nigel Jones, who used to be the well-being partner at Linklaters, or he was head of well-being but a senior partner at Linklaters, and he had been campaigning for kind of 10, 20 years and just getting nowhere. It was all lip service. No one would actually do anything. And he is saying he's starting to see things kind of really change the last year.
Yeah, I think, I mean, from what I've seen, the people I've spoken to, you have multiple angles where this kind of pays in. You have, like you said, the absenteeism, the presentism. You have the effect of disengagement within a workforce. I did an article on that as well, which can cost. There's some of those hidden costs. But then you also have the kind of talent piece as well. You want to keep your people working well. You want to keep them there, and you want to attract people and keep them there, because all of that has costs and impacts your performance and your bottom line. So, yeah, this has all changed. But the thing I want to come back to that you mentioned earlier on, that role of the employer. Now, with COVID, things have changed, significantly, pretty much everywhere you look. And one of the things that is coming up a lot in these conversations is that when we were all working in offices, those of us who work in offices, there was the heating, the lighting, the air, the environment was carefully managed to give us optimum safe working environments. But now we work from home. We could be working in a little dungeon of an office where we don't get enough light, we don't get enough air, and it's pretty cold. So there's a physical side of things, which I think employers are going to have to really embrace, figure out how they deal with that. But then there is that mental health as well, isn't there? How do you see that role evolving?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There is a physical health side, but I actually think the mental health side is much bigger. I mean, at the end of the day, why are we working from home now more? It's to do with the blunt tool of dealing with COVID, which is effectively, let's stop us socializing face to face. And fundamentally, we are innately very interactive species. We rely on the tribe, we rely on those interactions to kind of bounce off each other, to get motivated, to dissipate stress often. And I think a lot of people are finding the first lockdown, there was the novelty of working from home. There was obviously the stress of COVID, but there was the novelty of working from home, only maybe falling out of bed 10 minutes before 9, finding you've saved a couple of hours due to the commute, you've saved some money because you're not at the commute. A lot of things were kind of really stacking up where people were saying, God, this could be it forever. But I really feel the narrative is changing, and people have found as the monotony and the constant cycle of just being on site in one place with the same 2 or 3 people is really affecting people's, not only their mental health, but also just more general things like motivation, feeling more stressed, drinking more alcohol. I think the shock to the system is only just starting to feed through from a mental health point of view. And that's why if you look at all the curves, you're going to see like the actual physical health implications of COVID will kind of die down in the next year or two, but the mental health will peak in a year or two.
Yeah, I see that too. I mean, we have 3 small children, and we were very worried about the mental development as well as mental health of telling them to keep away from people. It's not a good thing to tell developing minds that humans are scary and should be kept away from. So these things, I think there's a very long tail on this. And from the UK point of view, from what I've experienced, it hasn't been very well equipped from the kind of health service point of view of dealing with mental health. I mean, it has evolved, but I think there was a study I read that in 2019, 11,000 mental health nurses were lost due to budget cuts. So how do you see the role of technology picking up some of that gap? And it's not even a small gap anymore, it's an enormous gap.
Yeah, I think you've started exactly the right point. So fundamentally, we are really under-resourced in terms of staffing. And, that takes years and years to kind of build up that gap. And actually the costs of, we're seeing this across the whole of healthcare actually, but mental health is just one example. But the costs are spiraling across the West because we're living longer, we're living more unhealthy lives, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, and as a proportion of GDP, the NHS has only gone up over the last kind of 20 years if you look at the overall trends. So we're going to see that actually the government, I think, isn't going to be able to provide absolutely everything. And actually innovative, small, new businesses are going to have to kind of fill the gap, even if maybe they're actually ended up being funded by the NHS. But I don't think the NHS is going to be, it's a massive behemoth of a tanker kind of moving along. And it's going to be very difficult to find that innovation through the NHS. So I think companies like Minderful and other kind of talking therapy ones like IESO, and there's a whole range of brilliant companies coming out now. And I think we're going to have to fill that gap. And we're also going to have to really focus on prevention. We've seen and heard a lot of public health kind of spokesmen recently, but the public health people love to always say prevention is better than cure. And I think that mantra is going to be running through like how we tackle all health problems going forward. And I think that's what I love about Minderful is that we can be positive. We're not targeting people who are ill. We're targeting people who are struggling maybe, but equally are just then living their normal lives, but wanting to kind of look after their minds. And it might be worth here just saying briefly just what our approach to mental health and kind of
please do. That'd be great. This is next on the list. Tell me more about what it is, the science behind it, how it all works. So let's do that now.
So I'll quickly give you an overview. But basically, we're trying to create a product that basically, after being used for 3 to 6 months to a year, will have churned out a very personalized mental fitness routine for the user. So we know that the brain is very complex. It's got 9 billion neuronal connections in the frontal cortex. No mind is the same as any other. There's no one size fits all solution. There's no silver bullets. We need to find something that works for an individual. So we've kind of gone really down that line and said, right, well, we need to create a kind of product that allows people to discover what works for their mind. So we've done a kind of front end of the app, which is just really a positive scrolling experience where we've identified hundreds of ideas that are good for the mind. People can scroll through those ideas very easily, click on one, listen to a 2-minute audio saying why it's good for the mind and what we'll be doing next if you want to integrate this into your routine. And if they want to, then they can say, right, I'll put it into my routine, at which point they'll get a drip feed of content for a month that's just prompting them to start trying to get that into their routine. And the other thing to say is that we don't, we think, Headspace has done a wonderful job at kind of getting meditation out there to millions of people who wouldn't have done otherwise. But at the end of the day, meditation is only one part of your mental fitness. Meditation isn't going to cure all your problems. You need to find increments across the board. So what we want to do is allow people to kind of collect probably 5 to 10 different things that become their routine, and we support them to integrate that. And the other thing is, on the Headspace thing is also, like, for example, Calm is a big, highly successful well-being competitor, and my co-founder James always likes to say, well, what if I don't want to feel calm all the time? And I think that's a big thing for us, is kind of offering that broad approach so that people can find something that works throughout their lives, not just at certain moments.
No, very interesting. And I have to say, the one that caught my attention as I was scrolling through this positive scrolling experience. Yeah, now you mention it, I totally get it. As I scrolled through your website, I found it very kind of welcoming. It wasn't intimidating. It was very easy to understand, and it was a positive experience to scroll through. It was very simple to understand it, but one jumped out at me, and that was being mindful with half a pint. You don't find that on Headspace or Calm, I'm sure.
No, and I think we've obviously got to be careful, but equally that's what allows us. We're targeting a well audience. We're not targeting people, and we don't want to be too. We found the well-being space as a whole can be a bit too, well noises, kind of candles, yogis, gurus, whatever, and actually. A lot of and this is interesting when you look at Calm and Headspace. They're very good at retaining people once they get there, but they don't get a great conversion. So they only get, once they get people onto that, they only get 4% who actually convert. And for me, that makes sense, because actually they're targeting a very niche audience, because they're offering a very specific offering. Whereas we want to be that more rounded one, where we can be a bit cheeky, we can be a bit more real, I suppose.
No, that's very interesting. So there's two more angles I want to explore. One is kind of what the tech is and how digital can help. And the other thing is more on the kind of medical side. And you span both roles, which is really interesting. So let's come back to digital in a second, but talk about the medical side. There has been, I have heard it said in interviews that one of the challenges in the kind of MedTech, HealthTech space right now is there's so many startups who want to come in and do something good, and their intention is good, but there's so much risk that brings, because, well, the medical space is very well regulated, and there's all these things that you should or you should not be doing, and there's risk of losing data, or what is the intended use, and how can things be abused or misused, either intentionally or accidentally. How do you look at that? Should there be regulation around this kind of technology, this kind of application you're working on?
Yes, so I think fundamentally, it's very personal data. We're trying to engage with people in their kind of daily routines, and they actually might kind of be giving away information that they wouldn't normally give to some of their loved ones. So I think even though it's not an illness space, it's still a very kind of sensitive space. So I think, well, fundamentally, it's always the anonymized kind of rule versus kind of giving out any actual individual data. And I think you are touching on a really important point, because when you're starting up as an early business, you don't have the funding or the infrastructure to actually put in place necessarily rigorous enough kind of structures to protect people's data. We're actually very careful on that point. I mean, our founding chairman, who only came in a few months ago, he's an advisor to the World Health Organization and Ofcom on ethical use of data and communications and stuff. So we have to find that line between, yes, we need to keep moving forward, but also be sensible. But I think ethical tech and is really important for us. So at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? We're trying to create positive behavioral change. Gambling companies are trying to create negative behavioral change, but they're the same principles that they're trying to apply. That, like, we're trying to use clever behavioral science and make a lovely, pretty product to get people to do something. So we are very careful with how we. So one of the big problems I mentioned earlier on with mental health is this addiction to social media and the dopamine rush. So we're very careful about making sure we don't want to create an app that's so addictive that people come back to it multiple times a day. We're also very focused on creating our initial tagline in the first couple of months of setting up Minderful a year ago was the app to get off apps. We want to create an app that gets people doing things in the real world and gets them out of the digital world, which sounds a bit perverse for an app to say that, but actually it can work if you get the right balance. So it's hugely in our minds. I think, to be perfectly frank, we probably, we have to find that line between, actually getting something out the door and not, but we are very careful with, at the moment, we don't use any, so for example, our data on our website, for example, is all anonymized and actually, and we don't know anything, just because we decided it's not worth even going down that route where we can just track individuals specifically. Of course, you can all these kind of getting them to tick certain boxes and stuff like that. But I think at the moment, we just want to see how people are interacting with the product. We don't, and we've got a good enough interaction with our target audience that we don't need to be knowing exactly how people are following through each use of the app. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's an area of interest that I think is only, for me, growing. The more I hear about this, it's just growing even more. From the kind of technology point of view, from the digital point of view, again, in other interviews, I've heard doctors say that whilst the face-to-face is invaluable, digital can sometimes actually be more effective. So tell me more about kind of what you're aiming to achieve with, its digital distribution and digital reach.
Yeah, so I think I'll answer this less so from Minderful, because we don't really do face-to-faces with clinicians and stuff like that. But yeah, really interesting at the moment. I'm hearing more and more psychologists saying that actually video calls, that they find they can engage more with their patients. There seems to be a bit more confidence. The user might be in their own room. They don't feel quite the same hierarchy they might feel in face-to-face. So they're seeing some big positives. There's another really interesting one, is that IESO, which is a big CBT provider across the country, they don't even they just do instant messenger. And that creates even less of a, people can write in a message much more candidly and much more openly than they can even face-to-face on Zoom. And what's powerful about that is that they've then got all the data in written in Word directly from each session. And they've got over 1 million sessions of CBT now. And they're starting to be able to, from my point of view, they're doing loads of stuff with the data, which is of value. But the most interesting one for me is they're starting to think that they can phenotype different types of depression, because they've got so many cases. They can start to see that actually, and then once you can do that, then you might be able to start actually applying specific types of therapy to specific types of depression, which are more effective than what we've got at the moment. So no, there's really interesting stuff out there. And I think overall, I'd say that psychologists have been surprised at how much they can do. There is still an old school grouping, probably more the psychoanalysis side of things, who really struggle to accept that. So, but I think the data is really starting to show that it is effective.
So yeah, I think we've talked quite a bit about what's happened in the last couple of years and how things have changed for you and for Minderful. Let's think forward, maybe 2-5 years. So what do you expect to see? What do you want to change? And when it comes to these magical United Nations SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals that we're aiming to achieve by 2030, what do you see there? I'd love to know your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think, I'll come to the more kind of peripheral ones, but I'll start with the core ones where I think it's relevant to what Minderful is doing in mental health. But I think, obviously good health comes in there. And I think goes back to what I said a bit before, but what we're finding is that the intensive costs of new medicine and the rising life expectancies and the increasingly unhealthy lifestyles we lead means that we need to find kind of cheap ways of kind of preventing a lot of illness. And I think tech is the obvious way to do that. It creates this opportunity for scalability and virality and for getting what is technically not that expensive to create a beautiful, lovely app with wonderful content that just nails that behavioral change. And that, that might end up costing you £1 million, £2 million. But if you can get that out to hundreds of millions of people, that suddenly means that this is very accessible and very cheap resource. I think on the good jobs and economic growth is relevant also. I think we're targeting B2C. We personally feel that people's mental fitness is very personal, and that the kind of job environment isn't the right place for that to be led from. But equally, we would be focusing on work-life balance with some of our ideas and how we're helping people improve their mental fitness, making them kind of more aware of some light touch CBT, light touch psychology, of understanding failure, understanding vulnerability. These type of things will actually help people make better decisions in the workplace. And then, as I suppose, economic growth. If you've got a healthier population, that's only going to improve economic growth. In terms of some of the other ones, I think a lot of what we are preaching in terms of kind of is this biopsychosocial model. So people's mental health is very broad. It involves biological factors, psychological factors, social factors. And a big one for us that we've noticed is this loss of community. And COVID has obviously had a big impact on that. But I think we would hope to help support people to kind of make those steps, like call grandma, go to the local gardening club, go to the local walk club, meet a friend in your local community. Those are the type of things we're going to be trying to help people do and achieve. And I think, there are others here. Quality education. Fundamentally, what are we trying to do? We're trying to educate people to make better decisions for themselves. So I think we'll be touching on a lot of these, but primarily, I think it's really the kind of the good health obviously makes the most sense. But even life and land, I'm not quite sure what that goal stands for, but I think one of our core attributes or core pillars of mental fitness is nature. It's something that we think is so important that it's one of only 6 of our core pillars, because we think getting people outside into the green, seeing something external growing, seeing something outside of their own inner turmoil can be so powerful. So there's loads of things here I think that we can kind of help with and support.
Yeah, I think that nature thing is so important. I mean, when I'm having a bad day, the hardest thing I find is to get out of my seat and take myself into a new environment. Whenever I do, it's the most powerful thing I could ever do. It really is. Just getting outside is, even if it's raining or snowing or whatever, so powerful.
Yeah, and I love that example of whether I think the weather can be such a powerful thing, and actually it's weird, we have it at our fingertips. We can see what the weather's going to be doing in 2 hours. So I often think one of my favorite things to try and get people to change is actually making the most of each day's weather. So that one bit of that 1 hour of it opening up and it being a beautiful crisp blue sky, like we very rarely make that plan our day around that. But actually, why don't we?
Interesting indeed. Yeah. So if any of our viewers want to kind of get some inspiration about how they can help some of the issues you've been talking about, maybe they've got their own challenges that they're trying to deal with, where would you point them? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, so I think specifically around mental health, we're probably not the service for you if you're acutely unwell. But what we are is there for you when you're in that process of recovery and well enough to engage with these things. If you're really depressed or really anxious, trying to create a new habit is really stressful and actually can often exacerbate the situation. So if you're feeling ill enough to think you need help, ask for help, and that's with professionals. One of my favorite mantras is the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. And sadly, a lot of these mental illnesses make it even harder to ask for help. So when you're depressed, you don't think you deserve help. When you're anxious, you're too scared to ask for help. And when you're psychotic, you don't think you need help. So if you think you need help, just go for it, okay? And I would say there are some brilliant resources online. Every GP practice now has a kind of community well-being and first access point for people with mental health problems. So that would be my first point of call.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much for everything you've shared with us today. We'll wrap this up, but there's always at the end, I always like to ask one question, and you don't have to answer, but it's over to you. It's not a difficult one at all, but it can catch you off guard. The question is just simply: is there anything that you'd wish I'd asked you today that I haven't, and anything else that you want to share?
I think, yeah, I think the only thing I would, no, I think I've enjoyed the conversation very much. It's kind of, and it's been quite kind of varied across the kind of mental fitness and mental health. I think overall, I suppose I think it's always important to say that I did mention it very briefly that that I do have a diagnosis of bipolar, and I think probably the last thing I'd say is that being able to talk openly, whether it's something kind of that sounds quite serious like bipolar, or if it's something stressful, and this feeds into the kind of asking for help, but it is always better to over communicate than to under communicate. And I see it all the time, and because by the time you're really ill, it gets so much more difficult to manage. And so I would, err on the side of caution, speak to a loved one, get a sense check of where you are, just with someone else, other than just in your own mind. That would probably be my last point.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. I'll keep that there and we'll leave it there. I'll just say for anybody who's watching, if you've enjoyed this, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's plenty more videos there that hopefully will inspire and interest you. And on that, Dr. Nick Pryor, thank you very much for your time. I'll make sure I stick some links into the projects that you're working on for Minderful, and I'll just leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Great to chat, Scott. Thank you.